like that music.
Indeed, indeed, yeah. We have new music on the diary, and I should be interested to see if anybody in the chat can identify which story that is from.
The Davison one.
An award of absolutely nothing at all for the first person to identify.
No prize.
Yeah, here we go.
A copy of Space Babies to the person who gets it right.
Multiple copies.
So here it is. Yes, the diary is back. Welcome to a brand new year of diaries. If you are new to Type 40, this is the diary section is when we take a look back across, well, more than 6 decades of our favourite show to see what was happening in the worlds of Doctor Who this week in years gone by. So who knows? We might hit the fast return switch for more than 60 years ago to see what was happening right at the very dawn of time, at the creation of the Whoniverse, if you like. Or we may just do a short hop and we might just skip back just a year or so. Like the TARDIS, the fun of the diary is in the unpredictability, in that we can set the coordinates on the console, and we can give the helmet regulator a really good twist, but we're never quite certain where or when we will land. Our landing point today could be any one of 25 new episodes. There were 25 new episodes screening at various points of the time continuum this week in years go by. So you could have been watching BBC One in the final week of February over the past 62 years. You might have been watching The Seeds of Death. Episode 6, The Seeds of Death, was just concluding back in 1969. 7 years later, in 1976, The Seeds of Doom, not to be confused with The Seeds of Death,
all about the seeds,
was nearly that's nicely topical because of the fact. Have I frozen? Did I freeze there?
You did, but you're back now.
Sorry if I froze. Yeah, Doctor in the site. I'm back now. Doctor in the Silurians, yeah, was screening. It was in the middle of its run back in 1970. That's nicely topical because, of course, we've got the season 7 box set out next week. So many stories we're screening. To bring us back down to earth with a bump, can you believe it's 5 years since the Timeless Children was trying to rewrite the previous glorious 57 back this week in 2020? But we move on. So the spoiler alert is that we're not going to be talking about any of these episodes in today's diary. What on Gallifrey can be left to talk about if we're skipping over, get this, the Web of Fear, the Sea Devils, Death to the Daleks, the Talons of Weng-Chiang, Enlightenment. All of these were screening in years gone by this very week, the last week of February. But we're not talking about any of them. First and foremost, I do want to wish a very, very special Type 40 40th birthday to Sadie Miller. Sadie Miller is celebrating her 40th birthday this week, and I mention that purely because, Dan, we've not long released our chat with Sadie.
That's right.
And Daisy
Ashford
at Hooverville towards the end of last year, in September of last year. So August even. So yeah, so very happy birthday, Sadie, and to everybody, go out and there it is. There is our podcast on the right there, where Daisy Ashford and Sadie Miller were very indulgent with us, weren't they? They were great, game for a laugh. Thank the Lord, they were game for a laugh. So happy birthday, Sadie. But so what are we really talking about this week? Well, what we're really talking about this week is a word actually that's been on every Who's fan's lips for the past week or so, and we've already talked about it, and that is the dreaded word is cancellation. And so this time we are giving the helmet regulator a really good twist, because we're heading back to the turbulent time at the very birth of Doctor Who, because unbelievably, the early part of 1965, exactly 60 years ago, was when the show was just 1 year old, and it was nearly, for the first time ever, Doctor Who might very easily have disappeared from our screens forever.
Exterminated.
Exterminator. I leave a dramatic pause. I feel there should have been a nice echo effect on forever there because
we'll have to get that sorted. Get some echo effects.
yeah, sort that in the edit. Sort that in the edit. Now, listen, folks, this is actually quite a complicated story. So you better hold on to your hats, strap yourselves in. So you remember those ridiculous safety harnesses that they used for one night only in Time Lash? Funnily enough, exactly 40 years ago. Yeah, strap yourself into those ridiculous those TARDIS harnesses, because this could be a bit of a bumpy ride. We're actually back at the beginning of 1965. And as we can see from the screen, Dalek Invasion of Earth had recently completed transmission with episode 6, Flashpoint. And that particular episode, the final episode of the Dalek Invasion of Earth, actually marked the 52nd episode to be made. Think about that for a second. 52 episodes of Doctor Who had been made by the end of the Dalek Invasion of Earth. Logically,
in a short period.
Well, also do the maths. That's one complete year. 52 weeks is one full year. So that basically marks the end of the initial 1 year run for Doctor Who. So it was logically, time was up. It was over. That was the end. That was what they contracted everybody to, was 52 weeks. It was contracted for a full year. That was what they planned to do. There was a short break, of course, before, in effect, season 2 started with Planet of Giants and then the Dalek Invasion of Earth. But effectively, this was the end of the full 52-week run. The cast had been contracted for that. So, in a kind of turn-left moment, this could have been the end of Doctor Who forever. And
this is all complete news to me.
Now.
I've never heard any of this before.
We wouldn't even be sitting here talking about this, because Doctor Who could have ended now, back in 1965, exactly 60 years ago. Now, equally spooky to this, in a sort of very timey-wimey way, is the fact that the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which closed 52-week run out, Dalek Invasion of Earth began its life exactly 61 years ago this week. It's like this stuff writes itself, isn't it? I do want to mention at this point, I'd really like to mention and pay tribute to the Black Archive book on the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which I have here. Here we go. If you're not aware of Black Archive books, I cannot recommend these things.
I've seen these online, but I've never bought one.
I can't recommend these highly enough. Go to Obverse Books online, to the website Obverse Books. They've got so many of these now. They're basically they're full critical analyses of a single Doctor Who story. So in this case, obviously, this one is for the Dalek Invasion of Earth, and I can't recommend these highly enough.
Brilliant,
just brilliant pieces of work. Seriously,
it's like a real library.
If like me, you're into your critical analysis and you like sort of delving deeply into this stuff, these are brilliant. Now, interestingly, on the chapter 1, the first page of chapter 1, one of the first lines is, for the first 9 months of its life, Doctor Who was always on the brink of cancellation, only originally commissioned for 13 episodes. But then obviously they had the option to go on and make the remainder that would have made 52. This book is a brilliant summary of what was happening in this turbulent point in the history. What basically happened, the Dalek Invasion of Earth, before it had even been made, there was no certainty whatsoever to say that Doctor Who would continue beyond that initial 52-week run. And so back in February 1964, the year before, the Daleks, the original Dalek serial, had just finished broadcasting. Now, we always assumed that was the point in Doctor Who's history, that the future was secured and
Dalek Mania and all that.
Of course, the Daleks were huge. So we always assume wrongly that was the point that Doctor Who's future was assured. But as we'll see, it couldn't be further from the truth. On the 20th of February 1964, so just a few days ago, BBC Enterprises, which in those days was responsible for the overseas and the merchandise, that's now become, obviously, as we recognise, it's been merged with and become ultimately BBC Studios. But BBC Enterprises, as it was in 1964, as I say, just a week ago, on the 20th of February, had clocked the massive commercial potential of the Daleks, because, as I say, that initial serial had just completed screening. BBC Enterprises had contacted Sidney Newman, head of drama, who of course had created Doctor in the first place, and they asked Sydney, are the Daleks returning, because they really wanted them back. But it was on the 24th of February 1964, 24th of February, just a couple of days ago, 61 years ago on Monday, that Donald Wilson, who was the head of serials, replied to say, yes, the Daleks will be coming back. And that's because this week in 1964, the Dalek Invasion of Earth was commissioned from Terry Nation to become that final serial that would close out the 52 weeks of that first year. And the wheels were set inexorably in motion for the beginning of the end of that 1 year run. Now, this is where things begin to come really unstuck in a fashion that actually makes today's messy shenanigans that we've just talked about whatever might or might not be happening behind the scenes on current Doctor Who, it makes that look like play school. As we've already mentioned, Serial K, which would become the Dalek Invasion of Earth, as I say, was due to end the year-long contracts of the cast. And we'll see, you brought it up a second ago, Dan. We've got there We've got, there we go. That is the official document that basically says the contracts of the main lead characters expire on October the 24th. It's urgent that we renew on the basis of a run-off program. This basically means that this was in May 1964, that this had already been flagged up, that these contracts needed to be renewed. As I say, so this is sort of 6 months ago we're talking now.
Good chunk of time.
At a big chunk of time. Now, the problem with all this is that the powers that be at the BBC had not yet agreed to extend the show. Donald Baverstock, who's the chief of programmes for BBC One, was considering just 7 more episodes after the Dalek Invasion of Earth, just purely to finish the show off. Now, Carol Ann Ford's agent had already tried to get her out of her contract early because she was not happy with the way the character had not developed in the way she'd been promised. So she wanted out of the show. So now, bearing in mind that the 52-week run was ending, she absolutely wanted out now. She did not want to be continuing to sign up to a new 52-week contract. So by late spring 64, there was still no news of an extension. The Dalek Invasion of Earth was being written with the intention of bringing in a new companion called Seda. But the problem with that was going to be pointless. If they weren't going to continue with the show beyond the Dalek Invasion of Earth, what was the point in writing out Susan and bringing in a new companion just to then end the show? It would be a complete waste of time. Likewise, if the show was only going to continue maybe for a few weeks after the Dalek Invasion of Earth, they'd need to renegotiate Carol Ann Ford's contract as well for her just to finish off that initial run of maybe 50, 60 weeks perhaps at the most. And this is where then, here we go, this is where Verity Lamberts now basically wrote a memo saying, look, we really need to know what's happening here. The last day of recording.
Never heard this before.
William Hartnell has, as you can read on screen, William Hartnell's already had an offer, and they're looking to go ahead. Likewise, by now, William Russell was also in negotiations to move on. You can see Verity Lambert saying she's not intending to renew Carol Ann Ford's contract. So basically, it was getting difficult.
This reads so cold, doesn't it, Simon?
Yeah, I have a feeling that if we wait for much longer, we will find ourselves in the position of losing our artists, which can only lead to a certain amount of chaos at the end of our next serial. So things were getting really quite serious by this point. Sidney Newman and Verity Lambert both separately threatened to pull the plug at the end of the Dalek Invasion of Earth. They basically both independently said, look, we can't go on with this. We're going to have to pull the plug. We might as well
out of a sense of professionalism.
Yeah, we might as well just finish the Doctor Who at the end of the Dalek Invasion of Earth because we're at risk of losing the entire cast. Indecision as a result of this led to them dropping the new girl, Seda, who had been mooted as Susan's replacement. She just got dropped from the Dalek Invasion of Earth, why you no longer see Seda in that show. So
the traces don't
chaos.
The traces don't remain in any other fringe character.
No.
They just wrote the thing out.
They wrote her out. I mean, in effect, she's replaced by Jenny, but Jenny was a completely different character to Seda, because Seda was going to be a young girl of around about 14. They'd even got the actress contracted to play Seda, so they had to pay her off and cancel the contract.
Interesting, Simon. Sorry, I was just going to say, when you're saying about a girl of about 14, was it around the similar time? Do you remember we were talking about a few weeks back about the comic strips with the boy and girl? Do you think maybe they were going that? Yeah,
it would have been around about the same time that they were in the comic strip. Yeah, absolutely. And so they were looking to replace Susan with very much a younger character. Basically, it was chaos behind the scenes. Donald Baverstock finally agreed to extension. He finally agreed to 13 weeks, which meant that Carol Ann Ford could leave because they could write her character out and they would replace her with a new character that maybe would just go on for 13 weeks. But it was long enough to allow them to do that. So Carol Ann Ford was free. She was very, very happy. The remaining cast would have to be recontracted. But this was, again, where it started to get really messy, because by now, William Hartnell, bless him, was getting a bit cheesed off. He refused to accept anything now less than a 6-month contract. Also, both he and William Russell and Jacqueline Hill wanted more money. So, incredibly, Verity Lambert at this point was basically saying we might have to remove our entire cast, our entire regular cast. So here we can see another memo from Verity Lambert saying, look, William turned down the offer completely. He wants 6 months at minimum. William Russell's agent is on holiday. He will just about go with 13 weeks, but he wants to be brought in line with William Hartnell. He wants more money. Jacqueline Hill would accept 13 weeks, but again, she wants an increase in salary. We've tried, and Verity finishes on saying, we've tried to negotiate on any of the above. As you would see, it would mean an incredible, a considerable increase in money. Things were really, really difficult behind the scenes. What would they do? And time was running out because Terry Nation was trying to write The Dalek Invasion of Earth.
It's funny when you say this does look really difficult. I mean, was it particular to this show, do you think? Or a couple of people in the live chat have mentioned the momentum that are making the show on was similar to a soap opera. Was it the nature of this particular kind of beast? Whereas, say, on The Saint or a show like that, they wouldn't have had these problems.
They wouldn't have had these problems simply because it was something like The Saint or a film series, The Avengers, whatever, was a much more discreet beast in that they would have agreed to make 13 episodes.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And that would be it. The thing with Doctor Who was it was being treated in effect like a soap opera in that, it was. Remember, Dan, that when Doctor Who was originally commissioned, it was expected to run for a full 52 weeks a year. It was seen as a soap opera. There was going to be no break. The only reason there was a break between the Reign of Terror and Planet of Giants, when there was a 6-week break, was because Verity Lambert requested and said, we need time to catch up. We're simply running out of time here. We can't keep up with this.
I assumed it was like for the World Cup or for industrial holidays or something.
No.
Like that.
It was to catch up. It was to catch up, to make a bit of headway. So that was why there was a 6-week break. So they'd already broken what would have been a 52-week run, and then it would have continued another 52-week run. So this was not like your film series that you think. No, this was like a soap where it was kind of a juggernaut rolling along, and you either had to slam the brakes on and cancel it and stop it, or on the hoof, you'd got to work out what you were going to do.
Because they would get to a point where it'd be almost cheaper to start something else.
Well, Dan, that's an interesting point, because they were exactly that. They were looking for a replacement. They were looking for a replacement at this point.
Kind of like Matt wants them to do now.
They were trying to find, they were trying to find something different to do instead of Doctor Who, and they realised actually no, Doctor Who was well, A, very popular, but B, it was clearly much further ahead. They didn't want to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. It was easier just to continue with what they'd got, which is why Donald Baverstock finally finally, in the summer of 64, agreed to a full 6-month extension, basically William Hartnell's request, and finally the show was secured. And Baverstock sent round a memo saying
this one.
This one? Well, this is Verity's memo. That's basically Verity Lambert finally on August the 24th sent this to Donald Wilson, saying, after the drama of the last 10 days, we seem to have arrived at a solution, which is that Doctor will continue for another 6 weeks. William Hartnell has negotiated for a straight 6-month contract. We're going to have to raise the price. Donald Baverstock has agreed to it. She was renegotiating still with William Russell and Jacqueline Hill, but obviously they wanted more money and they got it. Not as much as they wanted, but they did get more money. And so finally, there she is at the bottom. I'll not bother you with the copies of all of the correspondence which has been going on about this. I'll leave it on your desk on your return because he was on holiday. Poor bloke. Poor
this was less than a fortnight.
Yeah. And so finally, after all those months and months of negotiation, you're talking 6, 7, 8 months of negotiation, finally we can breathe a sigh of relief and Doctor Who was saved. And thus that's why we are still here today. It could so easily have gone another way and we wouldn't be sitting here now talking about it, because the Dalek invasion of Earth would be the end of Doctor Who.
It's fabulous to read these communications, isn't it, Matt? Not just because of the information that Simon so beautifully summarised in there, but it's also the language they use too.
Yeah, so as I'm understanding it, they renewed. They ended up renewing William Hartnell's contract after the 26 weeks, but they didn't renew Jacqueline and
no, they did. They
did. Yeah, but after this. After this is when they left.
You're correct. You're spot on there, Matt. Basically, their 26 weeks then ran out at the end of the chase. And so, yes, they then departed.
I'm just trying to think of a timeline, Simon.
Yeah. So, well, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to know really whether Jacqueline,
because there's what's on screen is sort of in a different groove to everything that was going on here, isn't it? It is like two strings.
And what you forget, because there is that break between the Reign of Terror and Planet of Giants and the Dalek invasion of Earth is a few weeks into season 2, you forget that actually it was still within that first 52-week run. So that would have been the initial year. It would have taken it up to basically November 1964, and that's when it should have transmitted, and that's when the Dalek invasion of Earth would have ended transmission, and as I say, ostensibly with the end of the run.
Verity Lamberts, very no nonsense in these communications. I mean, they must have been pulling their hair out. Sidney Newman must have been beside himself, the boss, Mr. Bang, 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 or whatever he was. Buff, buff, buff.
Well, absolutely. And there is a memo out there. And by the way, for anybody that is interested in looking into this further, if you've got the Blu-ray box set for season 2, all of this paperwork is viewable in the PDF section on the Blu-ray. You can go and find every one of the pieces that we showed. And there's a great memo in there from Sidney Newman where he is threatening to pull the plug at the end of the Dalek invasion of Earth, not least because at that point he wants moving from Lime Grove Studios. He wants in to Riverside Studios. And he basically says, if you don't move us to Riverside, then I am pulling the plug on it. And it's a beautiful memo, and he says it would be a waste, it would be a tragedy to fritter away Doctor Who on limited resources. What he's basically saying is either make it properly or don't make it at all, and I'm taking it away.
It's a pity he's not around to have a word with Russell.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Punch him.
I was just thinking the exact same thing, Dan, in the fact that you can see the professionalism in Verity's work, in his work, and just all the paperwork. You can just see the profession. This is what we've got to get done. This is what we need. Yeah, they're not scatterbrained.
No, they're focused.
And it must have been a nightmare. It must have been very difficult, Matt.
Yeah. No, I think that's it was just an incredible achievement. They've got no idea.
And can you imagine William Hartnell behind the scenes? He would have been not in a happy mood. He would have been quite grumpy. And Carol Ann Ford really wanted out. And she was basically being told, we might not be releasing you because we might need you for a few weeks more. But Verity Lambert knew that was going to cost a fortune, simply because the leads, the 3 leads, will be able to just name their price. They'll be able to say, okay, you want us for another 7 weeks, you got to pay us.
And I can just see the relief, and then them to turn around and go, oh, now we have to replace them if we, with the newer contracts.
Termination must have been tearing his hair as well, because he was trying to write this script, but he didn't know whether Caroline Ford was leaving or whether she wasn't, whether Sada was going to be the new companion, whether she wasn't. He needed to know what he was doing. So it's just an absolute nightmare. And as I say, anybody that's interested, go and find the Blu-ray box set, go and look at the paperwork, or as I say, read the Black Archives book on the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which goes into far more details. And goes into the whole tortured process of the Dalek invasion of Earth. So I want to say, all that was happening basically 61 years ago in 1964, and reaching a culmination exactly 60 years ago this week in 1965. Crazy, crazy days.
We've got Stephen Braddock has dropped a comment in the live chat. He's watching on YouTube, Simon, and says, so that was amazing. I've never heard any of this before. Thank you for your research and presentation of tonight's Doctor Who diary. It's nice to be appreciated.
Thank you, Stephen. You're very, very welcome. It was. I had a lot of fun putting it together. When I first sort of started to uncover this, and I said to Dan, I just emailed Dan and said, "I've got an exciting one this time. This is quite a mad story that was unfolding." I'm going to finish the diary just very, very quickly. We're not going into any detail on this at all, but it would be improper for me not to point out that it's exactly 40 years ago, in 1985, that the great cancellation did occur. In fact, today was the day, the 27th of February, 1985, when who, as we see there, was axed in a plot by the BBC, or at least
in an article in the Sun.
It was a cancellation. It was a who knows what it was, but whatever it was called, it happened today.
This was one of the worst days of my life, Simon.
I agree, Dan. I remember seeing the newspaper. We got the Daily Express at that point in my family's household, and I remember just going to pick up the Daily Express first thing in the morning before I went to school. And sure enough, it was on the front page of the Daily Express, and I was just horrified. It's just utterly shocking. So it had been cancelled, and they very, very quickly backtracked to say, "Oh no, it's just been postponed."
We never took a paper in our house. I had to see this break on BBC One, courtesy of Sue Lawley, Staybridge's own Sue Lawley. She got to read that out to me. It was
Dan? Can you remember? It was broadcast on the 6 o'clock and the 9 o'clock news. Do you remember which one you would have seen it on?
It was the 6 o'clock. It was this one with Sue.
Yeah, with Sue Lawley. Yeah, there we go. The 6 o'clock news. There you go. See the caption now. Yeah, and it went on the 9 o'clock news as well. And then, yes, basically it hit all of the newspapers the next morning on the 28th of February. But as I say, the actual cancellation was today. It basically had been cancelled. JNT basically used Ian Levine to call up the press, to leak it to the press. Which is why it got stuck on the newspapers the next morning. And that was why the BBC then very, very, very quickly put out a very hurried statement saying that it had only be postponed. And that was what was that was what was announced the next day. And I just want to say, I know this is going to sound like a broken record, but if you're interested in this story, this is the Black Archive on the Ultimate Foe. This one, I cannot recommend this book highly enough if you are interested in the cancellation. This is by far the best book written about that era. The first chapter of it goes into great depth and the full timeline of exactly what happened at the point of the cancellation, and then obviously goes on to tell you the story about the Ultimate Foe that finished off the series, that replaced what they cancelled in February 85. This book is just my favorite Black Archive book. It puts everything down so clearly as to what happened in this hugely turbulent time. And there is the great Michael Grade. Mm-hmm.
The best thing was that we never even felt it because we were still on Peter Davison's era. So I'm just totally unaware of of all the horrible things that was happening in the UK at the time. So
it was horrible.
You know.
It was horrible, Matt. And the stories that were being bandied around. In fact, on breakfast news the next morning when they first started to talk about it, and on breakfast time in the breakfast news in those days, they used to do a newspaper section, a review section, where they get a guest in to talk about the newspapers. So of course, Doctor Who was in every one of them. So the BBC were in this embarrassing situation of reviewing the fact that they just killed Doctor Who. And there's this golden moment, and it's on the Blu-ray. You'll be able to see it on season 22 Blu-ray, where Frank Boff puts his hand to his ear and says, "Yeah, I'm being told we better move on from Doctor Who now," because it just the conversation just went on about Doctor Who, and the BBC were embarrassed. It was an awful situation for them.
I recently saw an Australian current affairs show actually did a thing on Doctor Who and the Doctor Who fandom. And they were talking about, all the things that was happening in the UK at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was really weird. But they're saying, don't worry, we've still got the show. So you don't have to worry about it.
We're all right here.
Yeah.
So isn't it remarkable how time repeats itself? Because we go back to 1965, weird. It was nearly cancelled. 1985, it was cancelled. 2025, who can say?
Well, I was going to say to you, Simon.
History repeats.
If you look at those articles there, when you've got like the Sun and the Star, they're talking almost like there's a love for Doctor Who there when it breaks. It's going to be cancelled. So.
Very much.
You look at it now, and you look at the articles about the recent rumours that went out. There wasn't the love for it like it was back in '85.
I think you're right, John. It fit back in '85. It was very obvious that the press really didn't want Doctor Who to go. It feels different this time in that the press are almost looking for the justification and the reasons why Doctor Who.
It's because Doctor Who is now synonymous with wokeism, and wokeism is dead. Really, it's been bleeding out for several months. It's the remnants of it are decaying as we speak, and the press can smell that. And Doctor Who has been known for years now as the most PC show on TV, the most woke show on TV. So that's what it is. Whereas you're quite right, John. The wording of these articles, there's a lot of regret and passion. Yeah. I suppose, definitely. I suppose, John, that Doctor Who sold newspapers. It was one of the few shows that they could always print stories about and know that it would shift more copies. That's probably not the case now, to be fair. Nobody buys newspapers anymore.
No.
But even so, this language, it's a good spot. This language is very different.
It's a different take on it, certainly.
The sympathy with Colin Baker, who hadn't even been playing the part that long. I mean, this is such an exhaustive story, and we've got a special podcast coming out about this. We've been holding on to it for a couple of years because it features the late, great Ian McLaughlin as our panelist, and Ian died a couple of years ago. So, but he really wanted to record that because it was a period of immense turmoil for him as a Doctor Who fan as well, and he was well into adulthood. So, listen out for that across all major podcatchers and the home feed.
Sorry, Dan, go on.
But it's on the home feed, and it'll be on the YouTube and Rumble channels as well. So it'll be right here. You can hear an extended talk about all of that. But it doesn't. 40 years. It seems like yesterday.
I know. And as I say, it is remarkable how history has repeated itself with Doctor Who, and it does. Obviously, it is 40 years, so it's logical that we would talk about it. But that's why we're not going to go into too much detail about it, because, as Dan says, we talk about it lots in the chat with Ian McLaughlin. And I can see there's a couple of people in the chat asking. Just a reminder, it's Obverse Books, OBVERSE, Obverse Books, that print these black archives. Go and hunt them down there. You can have digital
I've heard of that line of books. They've been running for several years.
Yeah,
but I'd assumed they were kind of deep texts on the fiction and interpreting the fiction. I didn't know they're about the making of the show. So they take a number of. I've got many of them. They take a number of different approaches depending on the story. So, for example, the Warrior's Gate one is an incredible book because it goes into detail about the troubled production on that one. Whereas something like the Robots of Death one, actually, Dan, they do with that one. They go into the storyline far more, and they explore robots in fiction. So
each writer takes a complete. They have many different writers, and they all take a completely different approach to the material that they're writing about. So you never quite know what you're going to get with them, which is why it's a fascinating range, and it's still ongoing. They're still printing them. Can't recommend.
Peter Harrington says next stop eBay. He's going to try and hunt for some of those, but it sounds like they are.
They're not
still
that expensive.
in print.
They're not that expensive from Obverse Books. You won't pay a lot for them.
About £4 to £9, I think, depending
about
on the
£6
option you
for
go
digital.
for.
I think it's about £6 for digital and about £7 or £8 for a paperback copy.
I assume they'd be about 15, 20 quid, something like that.
No.
More people finding us here on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X all the time. Lots of new names on this edition of the show for the entire live stream and for the Doctor Who Diary. Will Hadcroft's just dropped in. Huge Colin Baker fan. Will Hadcroft, and he says, I remember these years so well. I was 15 and worried that my hero was being attacked by the BBC itself. That's it.
Me too.
That's how I felt.
We all felt the same, and that was the approach that the press took.
That 3-letter word, why?
Yeah.
Why? And even now, even when you listen to Greg talk about it and you think with your adult's head on, you think, oh, well, you're willing to. But after about 10 minutes, you think, no, actually, that's still bullshit. Why?
Yeah.
It wasn't good enough. It was not good enough still.
No. Fortunately, the Doctor Who Diary has been plenty good enough, as always, Simon. What an incredible selection of points of interest.
A bit bonkers, wasn't it, that one?
Absolutely
visited. I had no idea that any of that had occurred back on the original show in those early days, with all those icons as well, sending bits of paper back and forward to one another. I mean, I don't know if that would have been internal or whether it had gone through the post, but my God, some of those envelopes or in trays must have been smouldering, John, with if not with anger,
fire.
then with a sort of a desperation of sorts. When they're making TV at that kind of momentum. Yeah, there's a lot of information there, obviously, and it's Simon. You put it together. You put it together beautifully. So thank you so much. Lots of people are happy to have the diary back too. I'm pleased to say there in the live chat, all your comments are appreciated. Your compliments for Simon, your appetite for what's to come. Too. Yes, the diary is back. We're back. Let us know what you want to hear more of as well, and maybe we could revisit some of these points, but. This is the beauty of the Doctor Who Diary, Simon. When we put this show together, over a period of time, this is a way that we can visit things that kind of fall between the cracks in the pavement in a way that reviews can't and discussions can't. Yes,
correct.
It works. It still works just as beautifully as it did when we first started doing this. Peter Harrington says, "Hooray!" I'm not sure what he's hurraying, but I agree. Hooray! Hooray!
I think it's hooray for the diary. Bless him.